surface with Franklin National when they were investing in Sardinius and the various drug trades with BCCI and Credit Suisse, White Weld, and the Bush family were involved in that one directly.
In drug trades?
In trading drugs. In other words, after the sinking of the Spanish Armada, the Spain could no longer carry the opium. They had to go through other means out of China. So that the point is that when Elizabeth sank the Armada, there had to be other means to do it. And of course, the Vatican found those means. And certainly the Spanish, until just recently, have never really recouped their power in the world after they lost that fleet. So that they found other ways. And the other ways were essentially through banking and through the various vehicles of control of government and social structures. The Jesuits, who had been banned in 1773, during that process of being banned throughout the world, except for 3 locations, created the Illuminati, the Bavarian Illuminati, in 1776 through a Jesuit-trained man by the name of Adam Weishaupt. And he then created the basis, along with Frederick the Great of Prussia and the Jesuits, through a man by Calastro, who essentially, through the mysticism, Masonic orders that the Jesuits were driving
we
through.
talked about mass hypnotism.
Right, Mesmer. Oh, certainly Mesmer was part of that, actually, and he was a friend of Franklin. But bringing the Jesuits forward with the advent of course, their reductions in South America, their communist experiments in South America, the plantations. And of course, America being founded by the Jesuits to begin with, at the time of the Revolution, they were directly responsible for elimination of any mention of the elimination of slavery in the first draft of the Declaration of Independence. Jefferson had specifically attacked King George, for working with the Vatican and the Barbary pirates, which were the Templars, who their fleet essentially took over for the Spanish, the Templars.
Oh.
They disappeared.
They were the Barbary pirates.
They were very much the Masons. They were very much running this whole thing with Islam, and that they were running slavery. Of course, Jefferson pinned that in the draft of the Declaration. Of course, John Carroll and the Maryland colony said, no. You can have one of 2 things. You can get rid of George and declare yourself free of George, or you can declare yourself free of slavery, but you can't have 2. Of course, the Maryland colony was the front end of slavery, where King George and the Vatican were essentially selling the slaves. They were running the slave trade. And that, so John Carroll, who was the bishop of the Americas, for as a Jesuit, who had been banned in 1773. Nonetheless, he was still in charge of things. He forced the elimination of any mention of the Barbary pirates, or any mention of slavery, or even the thought of getting rid of slavery. And that we ended up with the Declaration the way it was. And that certainly the Protestants were not happy. And certainly those who claimed to be Protestants, they're all Masons. Everybody of the 56 who signed, there was one Catholic, and that was Charles Carroll. And he came in and did it on August 2nd. He was sent in. He was the richest man in the colonies. They needed him if there was going to be a financial stream. He was the cousin of the top Jesuit who was running the country at that point through the slave trade, who actually was the one who built the first basilica using a Mason, who built Georgetown University, who gave the 10 square miles of Catholic Jesuit land to be Washington, D.C. in perpetuity. So the point is that the Vatican was interested in not allowing the colonies and staying with the Parliament and staying with Protestant England. So they wanted to, and of course Franklin had just had his son become the governor of New Jersey. So he wasn't interested in getting in the face of the Parliament or anybody else. You know, it was, from one generation, there was prestige, and his son was nearly an aristocrat as a result of that in New Jersey. So he wasn't interested in revolution. Certainly, as a friend of Edmund Burke, he was interested in getting rid of slavery, number one, that was on Franklin's mind, and staying with England, bringing in elections so that the colonists could vote representatives into the Parliament. Of course, George would have no part of that. He, in fact, although he was tactically a Lutheran in Germany, in fact, was very much a papist. And of course, the papacy is about monarchy. It's about sovereignty, the sovereignty of monarchs. And of course, the Pope is the top monarch in that sense. But so the Jesuits were sent in specifically into the United States to prevent the colonies from staying with England and to replay the Cromwell successes, where he essentially kept the Catholics out of any control of the Parliament, supposedly. It didn't happen that way, but certainly Charles I had ceded in his wife's name in 1632, the Maryland colony, and they cut it out of Virginia, and with all the Virginians there, they said, well, George Calvert, who was Secretary of State, was given that. He had never been there. He was given Nova Scotia, but the point is that his son became the first governor, second governor of Maryland, and he was the one who brought in the Jesuits big time. The idea is that if the colonies had stayed with England, Protestant England, there never would have been a revolution. There never would have been, we would have gotten rid of slavery, and we would have had an entirely different world, and probably the Vatican would have been put back into the bottle quicker. So that the Vatican and the whole Reformation was really at the heart of things, and it still is.
Was he ever you say put back in the bottle quicker, but they're not put back in the bottle?
Well, Luther had made it clear that the Vatican was the great whore of Babylon, and that they couldn't refute that because they are paganists. They're absolutely not Christian. They have nothing to do with Christianity whatsoever. All of their symbols and rituals are all pagan, and they're mithril in their form. They're Zoroastrian, and it's the worship of Baal. So that Luther, being obviously my take on Protestants is they're all unhappy Catholics, but that the Jesuits' role in all of this is certainly in the insinuation of using the papal bank, which was set up under Mussolini, to dominate banking in the United States, Bank of America, what you see in Countrywide.
So would you say that that Bank of America is really an extension of
the Vatican?
So when they took over Countrywide, they weren't really taking over anything. They were just...
Well, look, we had discussed before we got on the air on the question of fractional banking.
Oh, yes, yes.
And certainly the Federal Reserve is not federal, nor does it have a reserve. Or if there are 12 banks, most of the other banks are in generally good shape. They're owned by the member banks who have to put a reserve in order to guarantee their part of the fractional. In other words, they're going to give you $1 if you put a nickel up. And it might be, I think it's more, but the point is, as an example, they're going to give you a use of $1 of debt for a nickel. So all these banks operate with a nickel in order to use the dollars in banking. What happened with the HUD structure is that we're not going to tell anybody. First of all, with the Y2K thing, where they were afraid all the computers were going to crash, Greenspan pumped out unbelievable amounts of paper in order to create liquidity. And he got rid of M3, which is the number that's published of the total amount of money involved. So nobody knew how much money was out there, so they just keep the